Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Welcome everybody. So I'm going to be covering the Eco Index this morning. It was a project funded by the National Science Challenges here in New Zealand, the Biological Heritage National Science Challenges. They were set up about 10 years ago by the New Zealand government to deal with some of the complex issues facing the country. One of the major issues was the decline of New Zealand's biodiversity. So we've had significant declines here in New Zealand. And so pulled a team together to look, called the Eco Index, which I'll go into what it does. But this is our team here. And myself and Kitty are the leads of the program. But just to highlight, we've got one of the things with the science challenges is that they look to bring together multidisciplinary teams to solve the complex problems. So the biodiversity problem wasn't just a ecological problem; it was an economic problem, a political problem, a psychological problem. So the teams are made up of many different disciplines, but particularly heavy on the data science, data modelling. But we've also got plenty of ecologists and also sociologists and psychologists on board. And our economist, Jay, is going to be talking about some of the economic components of the Eco Index, but also chipping in where in areas where I will fall short. So there's one thing there, the science challenge found was that we know that biodiversity in New Zealand is in decline, in serious decline. We also know that it's in serious decline internationally, and we also know what all the implications are of that. And we have measures in place to tell us that it's in a decline. We know the trends, but we don't have the information systems or the biodiversity information systems in place to guide decision makers, whether they're land managers or policy makers or industries or iwi or governors in New Zealand on how to address the problem. And so the Eco Index team was formed to plan and build a terrestrial biodiversity information system in partnership with iwi, farmers, industry and councils, and with some collaboration from our ministries as well. So these are some of our partners. So we received funding from Environment Canterbury and Fonterra as well for some of this work, but these are generally all of the partners we work with to build our Eco Index, hosted at the University of Waikato, but also University of Canterbury and Manaki Whenua are also involved. And then we've got a range of data partners, and probably Planet is our biggest data partner. They provided us with virtually free high-resolution data across the country, which really helped us pull together our tool. So this is sort of the key problem, or the key framing underpinning the Eco Index is, so maintaining biodiversity is dependent on large, healthy ecosystems existing across the landscape. However, if you want to drive change on the ground, that's driven at a micro scale. So that's, landowners, individuals and groups. So, it might be thousands of farmers or whatever it might be. So your actual change, has to be driven across lots of different parties. So the question we were facing is, how do we coordinate actions at micro scales to meet macro scale goals? And so the first thing we looked at building was a spatial planning tool to guide action and to coordinate ecosystem reconstruction actions on the ground, and to also develop an automated system for measuring ecosystem changes at micro scale, so we could see what's happening on the ground in relation to the macro scale targets. And then we developed automated systems for economic valuations. So this is ecosystem restoration, how much it costs, and what are the type of ecosystem services generated through any activity on the ground. And that's Jay's area of expertise. So I'll just start here with just bringing into some key biodiversity concepts, given that I know a lot of people here, of course, aren't ecologists, aren't specialists in the area. So this here is what they call the generalized species curve. So at the bottom, you've got a habitat area, so the ecosystem that supports biodiversity, and a number of species. Now, this is a generalized curve that tend to be found in most places in the world. But what happens is there's sort of this, as the ecosystem or habitat area declines, you reach a point, and once it gets to about 15%, where you get dramatic declines in the amount of biodiversity that's available relative to the ecosystem area. And so that's kind of a key goal of ours, was to say, well, if there's any ecosystems in New Zealand that are falling below 15%, those ecosystems are meant to be reconstructed or expanded up to that 15% mark to ensure that biodiversity doesn't disappear in those areas. Here's a graph. These are all the main ecosystem types in New Zealand, and you can see, so in some ecosystems, we've still got nearly 100% of the pre-human extent, right down to others which are well below that 15% target. And if you put a sort of a landscape view underneath that, you can see as you get further and further down, our ecosystems fall below the 15% target. And that's basically where all of our farming activity is, all of the production landscape is. That's where the ecosystems fall below the 15% target. So that's where Eco-Index is pretty much focused into the production landscapes, into the farming landscapes, and so forth, and exotic forestry, just because those are the areas where the ecosystems are falling well below the 15% area. So we have a look at this. This is an example here. I think this is Raglan up in the north. So you can see here, this is different ecosystems across a landscape, pre-human. And you can see over here the current. So you can see where the farming areas has displaced a lot of those ecosystems. So the question is, how do we look to do reconstruction into those areas, particularly to create corridors from existing areas of ecosystems down to the sea, to create continuity across ecosystems to join them up, and also to create stepping stones through the environment so birds can fly from one area to another, to reconnect up landscapes. So that's what something might look like if we did the sort of 15% target into that area, is to bring those ecosystems back. So what we developed was this tool here. And so this is the Eco-Index ecosystem restoration map. And it's a heat map across the country showing you every ecosystem in the areas where it's dropped below the 15% threshold. And so you can see here, here's Canterbury, where we are. And most of this area all used to be forested. And it was a Matai Kahikatea Tōtara forest all through Canterbury. And there's only less than 1% of that ecosystem left in the Canterbury region. It's 0.74%, and saying we need about 25,000 hectares of that particular ecosystem reconstructed or restored throughout that area to bring it back up to a level needed to maintain the biodiversity, or enhancing or recreating that biodiversity into that environment. So so that was the sort of first tool that we built. That's all free and freely available online for anybody to look at. It also breaks it down if you're regional council boundaries. So a regional council can plan how much ecosystem restoration is needed in the area. It's also done by iwi boundaries. So iwi can, our tribal groupings here can work out how much within their area is below the 15% threshold. We then worked on this other thing. It's called the restoration heat map. And so this guides you where to do ecosystem reconstruction within a landscape based on, based on the best evidence by ecologists in terms of the best science evidence. So, for example, here we've got a little remnant piece of native ecosystem. It might be an area of bush on a farm. And here's another piece over here. So we're saying that clearly the number one area to do your ecosystem reconstruction, to bridge these two, is this number one area. And then we have, if you can't do it in that area, then you might look at 2 and then 3 or 4. So that's kind of the sort of underpinning idea behind this particular tool. And this is what it actually looks like in action. And so we were working with the industry with this, particularly Fonterra in this case, because under the farm environment plans in New Zealand, a lot of the farmers are required to do restoration work across their streams, so redeveloping native ecosystems through stream boundaries and on their farms. But the question was, well, where do we do this? Where's the best place to do this? And we're seeing this this interest. And same with councils had the same sort of interest. So if you're looking at this map, the brighter the area, the higher the need for ecosystem reconstruction or ecosystem restoration. So you'll see here that around these little remnant pieces of native forest, and there's a ring around the outside. So that's a high priority area, just so to create stepping stones between this and this piece here, or between these areas. You also see it's also highlighted across all around all the streams, and that's so that you're getting the native habitat restoration along stream boundaries and so forth to create ecosystem services like cleaning water and things like that. We've also you can toggle on and off a whole range of different features, but it also highlights things like doing ecosystem reconstruction on erosion-prone land. It'll also help you determine where to do the reconstruction based on relative affordability. So you don't want to be doing the ecosystem reconstruction in areas that are highly productive farmland or something like that. So it takes all these into account to arrive at the appropriate, the algorithms do it in such a way as to identify the optimal places in the landscape for restoration. This is the underlying data flow logic. So we've taken a whole range of public data layers. We've combined it with our own derived layers, the layers that we've built, and then using a geospatial planning process, we then scored attributes to all the layers, which arrives at the heat map. I mean, if you want to take a deeper look or a deeper dive, you can check out the presentation online. The other thing we're doing is measuring changes on the ground. So it's one thing to know where to do something and to set these targets of where you want to head. The next thing is to actually measure the step-by-step changes over the years on the ground to see if you're heading toward those targets. And this is where we've been doing the remote sensing and artificial intelligence work. Here is where, this figure I think is from 10 years ago. It's from the central North Island, and it's a remu forest, regenerating remu forests. And you can see here the AI has been picking up the various ecosystems and detecting where they are. And then we can, over a 10-year period, we can look at the changes or areas where it's regenerating. So this is giving us this measurement of where we're heading toward these targets over time. And I'll pass it on to Jay to talk about the automating the valuation side of
morning everyone. Lower the tone of the conversation and talk about money like economists like to do, but this is my baby here. It's really the cost and benefit side of the equation, because we had a question yesterday, I think, and it was about how do you communicate bad news around climate change to communities. And, it's a lot of the biodiversity loss is the same thing. It can be a pretty negative story. And John mentioned that we reframe it as a positive story. And what we're doing here is really just communicating in the language of industry and policymakers, and that's dollars. The cost side, really easy. We just use market pricing. What's the cost of restoring a forest? Well, you have fencing, you have pest control, you have planting costs. It's pretty easy to determine those costs. The benefit side is the bit that I'm most interested in. So we're using a ecosystem services approach here, and some people might know what that is, but it's basically the idea that nature provides really valuable services that we basically can't live without. I mean, there's the climate control services, the flood control, erosion control. There's numerous services provided by these forests that don't typically get assigned a monetary value. And economists like me who work in non-market valuation come along, and we actually try to assign a value to that. And there's multiple ways we can do that. There's you can run behavioral economic experiments to determine how much people value something. You can look at travel cost pricing, like how much are people willing to pay to travel to a river to go fishing. But what's really massive here is the substitution cost. So if we have a forest that's providing erosion control, if we were to remove that forest, what would we need to spend in engineering solutions to replace that? And so what we can do is we can calculate the benefit of the environmental services provided, and we can compare that to the human capital alternatives and actually, highlight for policymakers, for industry, for farming, what the most efficient solution economically is to address a lot of environmental issues. And it usually ends up being the natural solution, the green infrastructure. The technical challenge we have here and moving into the next stage of where we want to go is there's amazing data out there now. There's huge economic databases of studies that value nature, but they're all done in their own language. They're all very disparate, and we can't connect them up easily. So this is where we're looking to natural language processing and generative AI to be able to say, well, how can we blend willingness to pay studies that are communicated in all different ways into a coherent set of data that can give us the value of nature. So yeah, I mean, the sheer scale of the benefits can be enormous. If you just look at that example with that's up Waikato, the Waikato region, we're looking at, to restore a forest in that area, the biodiversity, $426 million of costs, $4 million to maintain it annually, and expecting an annual benefit of 1.1 billion. So, that is vastly underestimating it. It's the best data we have at the moment. Those benefits are likely to be significantly more. So really, this is a communication tool. It's not providing exact figures. It's providing us a language that we can speak to people in finance. We can speak to people in policy. We can speak to farmers and say, hey, this stuff has real financial value. And then in a second stage, we can start trying to, use that value into financial markets and other things that hopefully bring in more money to fund biodiversity restoration. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, I think, John.
So in terms of the underpinning technology, and Nicholas asked me to throw in some stuff around the tech. I'm not an engineer. The engineers take care of that stuff. I have a general idea of what's happening in the area, but we've got multiple data inputs from satellite, aircraft, and drone. But the key one for us has been the multispectral, hyperspectral imagery from Planet. The GNSSR reflectometer, which is underneath a Air New Zealand plane flying up and down the country as part of the Wrongaway program here, is providing us with soil moisture content, which has been pretty essential for identifying wetland areas. But if you look across the bottom here, these are all the different ecosystem types, and these are our highest detection priorities. So these are the most vulnerable ecosystems. So these are the ones we want to detect first. And then as you head down, they're become less and less important. So we've got our input data here flowing in, and we're using neural network modeling to bring in this input data. We're using training data over here just to continually refine and develop our algorithms. Now these are, and then we've got our economic models over the square over the section, which Jay is pulling in, and then this runs into our GIS service, GIS platform to build our products. And of course, we've got all our community restoration groups, regional councils, and industry partners helping us refine and work through this process. So just to wrap up, I just wanted to cover what's happening internationally and national trends. It's just that biodiversity reporting is going to become compulsory under the Montreal Kunming Global Biodiversity Framework, and New Zealand's signatory to this, that governments have to put in place the legal, administrative or policy measures to ensure that business and financial institutions regularly monitor, assess and transparently disclose their risk, dependencies and impacts on biodiversity, which means that theoretically that all New Zealand businesses and financial institutions will have to disclose their biodiversity footprint by 2030. So there needs to be ways of measuring this to enable that reporting to happen. And of course, who's going to be most affected by that in New Zealand is our farming industry, and who are already starting to have to report on their farm environment plans on their biodiversity footprints. And there's also the biodiversity credit systems are under development, so there's a significant amount of work going on this area. Biodiversity Credit Alliance and UNDP working group on this, and in the MFE in New Zealand. And there's efforts in place to put in the market mechanisms for trading biodiversity credits. So you've got Tauhara and ECOS here in New Zealand. But the big problem has been verification. So you might be able to go, okay, we've got to do our reporting, but there isn't this automated system for verification. So this is where we see sort of EcoIndex supporting that process within a network of other collaborators. And just so what we're looking to develop, we've gone a way down the track around this, is the capacity to measure biodiversity changes on the ground. So the micro scale to the macro scale. We're looking to, and we're building this capability in detecting changes in extent and health on a frequent basis, monthly, although with the way the Reid ecosystems change, more like annual. And that's to support the ESG type reporting, verifying environmental claims, people making brand claims. So you get around the greenwashing sort of thing, so companies can actually verify what they're doing on the ground, verifying biodiversity credits, automating farm environment planning, and automating ecosystem restoration and service evaluations, which Jay's working on. And yeah, questions?